if I was to take any sort of message away from, the course and what I've been reading in the textbook, it's that there are more special cases in terms of differences within your classroom and kids and their abilities and their little idiosyncrasies and so on, than there are commonalities. Would you say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And that's for so many reasons. I mean, that's from what school they've come to from here, what kind of academic background. Obviously, it has a lot to do with what kind of family support, what discipline looks like at home, as opposed to what it might look like in the classroom, different expectations. We talk a lot about, when kids come to school and they act in these, what we think is outrageous ways, at home, there might be a really different framework in terms of what is acceptable. So, there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle that we have to figure out when we're looking at our kids. And you're right, there's no one, I don't get a certain kind of kid in here. After I've done it for enough years, I see certain kinds of kids who come through, and I think to myself, oh, I remember 3 years ago when I had this student that reminds me a lot of this student. And I can kind of draw from that experience to know what to do for that child, but there isn't a kind of child I got.
Right. And that's the general gist of differentiation, right?
Right.
I mean, you recognize the differences and you try to adjust your strategies, your teaching strategies, your assessment, and all of that to that kid.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's really important not to get locked into how to deal with a certain disability or a certain issue for kids. One of my favorite anecdotes is when I used to work in home therapy with kids with autism. There was a child who was really classically autistic, and at home he was fairly calm, and at school they just kept having issues and kept having issues. He was in first grade. And so finally the mom said, can you come into school with us and maybe we can sit down with the teacher and kind of sort things out and see what's going on with him. And we came in and he really wasn't doing very well. And the teacher said, well, I don't know, we have this weighted vest on him and it's not working. And the mom said, but Nicholas really gets overheated. He doesn't like things like that. He doesn't even like a winter coat on. And the teacher looked at us and said, but kids with autism like weighted vests. And it was just kind of this moment like, well, what do you mean kids with autism like weighted? Like maybe some kids with autism, that's a strategy you can use. But, that's kind of an extreme example because it kind of sounds ridiculous that somebody would be that locked into something. But it happens a lot in special ed. Or dealing with our special ed students, I should say. It happens with both special and regular ed teachers. That, you hear a label, you hear ADHD, or you hear emotional behavioral disabilities, or those different kind of labels, and you think, oh, I read this about that, so I know this is going to work. And it not only often doesn't work for the kids, but it's also really frustrating for the teacher if they think they have this grand plan that's going to work for every child and it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what kind of helps lead to some of that burnout that you hear about. And I think it's sometimes the difference between who stays in the profession and who doesn't. Like that willingness to be really flexible. For me, just I think the most helpful thing for me not getting exhausted from my job or knowing that I want to stay in my job is that resiliency, is knowing that I can spend 2 hours planning a great lesson that I think my kids are really going to connect to, and I can get 5 minutes into it and realize that they're not going to connect to it for a myriad of different reasons, and being willing to say, I'm going to have to scrap that and approach it a different way. Now, eventually, after I've done that for years and years and years, I have enough lessons in my bag of tricks that I kind of have access to those other lessons, or the backup plans, or the different way to teach it. But had I gotten frustrated the first few years when something didn't work and said, forget it, this just doesn't work, I probably would be doing something else by now.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say be flexible and be resilient. Don't ever commit too strongly to one idea because you will be sorely disappointed. But when you do find the thing that works, I mean, the converse of that is when you really connect with students and you really find that lesson that helps them really get that concept and you see that critical thinking start, it's worth it. It's worth having gone through a couple different ways to teach it.
Okay. Well, we don't have all the time in the world, so maybe just as one final practically oriented question, what sort of advice would you have for teachers entering the field now?
Well, again, I think being willing to be flexible about how you get into the field. I don't think it's realistic anymore that you graduate and you have a job maybe that next semester. It might not work out that way. I mean, I can't speak for the whole state certainly, but I know here, and we're an inner city school that probably isn't everybody's first pick to teach in. But, although I love it, it's probably not everybody's first choice. But we had a kindergarten position open here in the middle of the year because our class sizes just got really big. And there was like 200 applicants or something for one spot. Now, I don't know the statistics in terms of how many of those were in-house or, how many of those were not serious inquiries or maybe, applications they had on file already. I'm not sure. But the point of it is that there's a lot of people looking for jobs. For me, the best thing I ever did was sub. I subbed for a year and I really got to know the schools I would want to teach at. I knew the schools I really probably wouldn't care to teach at in terms of philosophy and how the administration ran the buildings. And that's how I landed a job, eventually was getting a long-term sub position and having a principal really like me and saying, we need to get you into the district.
And so that's basically what it takes. Sort of hanging out on the periphery for a while, subbing here, subbing there, putting your face in front of principals and administrators and district people and so on.
Well, and it's also beneficial for the incoming teacher though, because when in the days of just graduating from college and going right into a teaching position, you might be locking yourself into a building where you don't really fit that philosophy, you don't fit that teaching style, you don't really mesh with the staff. And I felt like going into my position, I knew the schools I would want to teach in. I knew what administrators I would really work well with. So it was beneficial for me too, for having, because really that's the only way to get that information. The other suggestion I would make is always be willing to take, in Kenosha you can say I'm only working at these schools, I'm only working at elementary, I'm only working at middle school. Well, nobody says they're only working at middle school, but or I'm only working at specific schools. I won't work in inner city schools, I won't work in tough schools. And I found, because I said I'll work anywhere, that I ended up, after a while I started to get called for the harder positions, the special ed positions, the middle school positions, that other substitutes would turn down. And I think administrators really, they value that. They value having somebody come in who's willing to say, I'm not just going to take the easy jobs. I'll work, I'll work where you need me. And I think that is more noticed than maybe somebody who says, I'm only teaching third grade at the Rich White School.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if you are doing your job properly as a teacher, you should be exhausted by June, and
yes,
and actually appreciate your 3 months off, which are necessary.
Right. It is no longer 3 months though.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit less than that. Yeah, definitely. I look forward to summer like anyone else, but I feel like it's well deserved, and I work hard during the year, and we're all ready.
Right. You need it to recharge your batteries.
Yes.
Okay.
And when you get a full-time teaching position, if you don't have to teach summer school, do not teach summer school. Because you will not go back ready.
Uh-huh. Yes, I can see how it would work out that way. All right, I think that'll provide us with some information, enough to stimulate some thinking, and who knows, maybe provide students with some information that they can actually apply once they leave the building, so to speak. So, thank you for your time, and if there's any last parting word you want to say, otherwise we'll turn the camera off.
I think that's